Hello economics students. So now that we know what inflation is, how we calculate it, and the different measures, let's think about what actually causes prices in the economy to rise. In 2023, we're living in an inflationary environment. Prices are rising by 6, 7, 8%. So why is that? What's causing those prices to rise? As we do so often in economics, we're going to divide it into two different causes. One is on the demand side, and you guessed it, we call that demand inflation. The other is on the supply side, we call that cost inflation. So let's have a look at demand inflation. As the name suggests, it's when there is too much aggregate spending in the economy. So whether that's from the government, from consumers, from businesses, but there's too much spending being put on the economy. And basically, the supply side of the economy can't keep up. Businesses cannot produce enough to keep up with the demand. And so shortages start to appear and prices start to rise. And you can remember that from both the circular flow model, but also from microeconomics, where if there's too much demand, prices start to rise. So basically this happens during expansionary periods, maybe when interest rates are really low, or when the economic growth overseas is quite high, anything that stimulates spending in Australia. Now, we're going to draw this on an aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve because another way of thinking about it is that the economy is operating too close to its productive capacity. So if you remember from when we drew the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves, we have a curved aggregate supply curve, and if demand increases by too much, we get towards this inelastic part of the curve, which is close to productive capacity, and all that happens is prices rise, and they rise quite drastically. That's what's happening with, that should have been labeled properly, that's what's happening with demand inflation. The other type of inflation is cost inflation, and broadly speaking, this is caused by negative aggregate supply side conditions. So things like there's been an increase in the cost of production. Maybe wages are rising and those costs are being placed on businesses. Maybe there's a decrease in productivity. Maybe there's some restriction in the growth of the productive capacity, like a climate issue. Any of these things will make it harder to produce, will make firms less willing and able to produce, or they may have to pass on some of these increased cost of production to consumers. And so we would call this cost inflation. It's when there's been negative supply side conditions. Now you can go into much more detail in that, and we will in class, but I'm just going to leave it there for the difference between demand and cost inflation. Bye for now.